So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that this happened? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, hey everybody. Sorry for a little bit of a production glitch there with the intro, but it happens. It's a thing. Don't worry about it. So I am here for a growing up in a young Earth creationist house with my friend here, Josh, who I was in the Navy with. That's how we met. That's actually how I met a lot of the people that I hang out with now. Um, but he was on the same ship as myself and Benthoven, whom you know. And this one is a little bit unusual because, correct me if I'm wrong, but Josh, you never identified yourself as a young Earth creationism or really accepted that whole thing, right?
No, I was raised around it, and I didn't really buy into it. I didn't know much about evolution as a kid anyway, but I was just like, I didn't really. I was never a convert, as it were.
Okay.
But I didn't. Yeah.
So, was your family always young Earth creationists from like, basically when you were first growing up, like as a little baby Josh?
Yeah, I still think they are, but then again, we don't talk about them much these days, so I'm not certain.
Yeah, well, it's one of those weird things. Like, would you? How are you gonna like? Why would you bring it up? Like, people don't sit around with their families saying things like, "Oh, hey, did you hear about that new paper about the stratigraphy of the Morrison Formation?" Like, no one does that, right? Um, so did you go to any like private schools that taught creationism or what?
I went to a public school that was on a military base, and they didn't really talk about evolution or creationism much either way. Like, I took biology and anatomy classes. We just stuck with, all right, this is the cell, this is the powerhouse of the cell, this is your skeleton, these are the muscles. Like, we never really touched on it. So it just happened. I was never really exposed to any alternative ideas, but I never really bought into the occasional uh, passing comment that my family said about. I remember one time my sister was like, "There's a difference between micro and macro evolution," and there's a distinction. Where did you hear this? And and then we didn't really talk about it ever again, or at least for a long time. And I mean, it's just I don't know where they were getting this, and I was never really. I was at the risk of it sounds like I was almost an epistemic babe in the woods. Like I was
Right.
just really not exposed to much of anything. But then as I got older, and then I was like, "Oh, so you guys think this?" And oh, okay.
So when were you first exposed to things like ideas about how old the Earth actually is, or like common descent, universal common descent?
Um, like from a non-young Earth creationist perspective,
Mm-hmm.
probably shortly after I graduated high school. I don't even think we ever talked about the age of the Earth. I think teachers just shied away from it. Like they didn't really like. So I mean, probably shortly after graduating high school, and I was just kind of like, "Oh, what's this? Oh." And I really didn't be, and admittedly, I didn't really become convinced of any position one or the other until my early 20s. Uh, but and I was like, yeah, evolution, yep, that's the thing.
Okay.
And yeah.
So it wasn't so much that you grew up rejecting young Earth creationism as you grew up not really convinced, but also not really convinced by anything else, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was largely because I mean, it didn't come up very often with my family, and then I wasn't really exposed to anything that conflicted with that uh, during my formative years.
So were there any particular creationist organizations or individuals whose like media was used in the home? Like, was there any like Ken Ham or Kent Hovind or Buddy Davis or anything like that?
You know, I don't remember anything specific, although much of the same arguments that they make were brought, like, the tornado in the junkyard.
Mm-hmm.
I heard several times. The whole random chance. I remember my dad saying somewhat dismissively, "Yeah, the evolutionists think that humans came when aliens had sex with monkeys." Like, I mean, I guess when you're a kid and you're not exposed to anything that like any counter argument. Like, yeah, if evolution is that, it sounds pretty stupid. But I don't know. Is that what evolution says? I don't know.
Right. That does. It does sound pretty stupid when you put it that way. Which is why no one puts it that way. Yeah. That's one of the things that always bugs me is the need of pseudoscience to strawman science. It's like, if you were right, you wouldn't need to strawman the consensus. You would be able to tackle the consensus head on in an open and honest fashion. And I ran into that same thing today in a Facebook group. Someone had asked, okay, creationists, what contributions have been made to science in the past year? Because, it's a day after New Year's when we're recording this. What contributions to science have been made based on the assumptions or predictions of young Earth creationism? And basically every response was tone policing. No one actually came on with anything. And it was just like, guys, why can't you answer this question? And why does it not bother you? That literally the only thing you can do is say that the question is mean. If creation science were doing science, you would have something to show for it. Instead, all you have is, be nice to me, mean Mr. Scientist Man.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of the core of a lot of creationist leanings, where a lot of people don't want to think too hard about it, but they still want to have some kind of answer. And then you have creationists like Kent Hovind and Ken Ham, where they kind of exploit that for monetary gain.
Yeah. Okay, so now in your 20s, did you start actively looking into this, or was it just something that kind of like passively happened?
It was a little bit like, at first I was just like, I don't care. And then I started, certain things started cropping up. I actually started talking to people that had a little bit more understanding of it at the time. And I think you being one of them, actually. And then that just prompted, like, wow, I really don't know anything much about this. That prompted me to look more of my own for my own edification. Yeah. And I was like, huh.
Well, and then, at least for a little bit, you were reasonably active in sort of the counter-creationist thing. Like, I remember at one point, we went to a creationist conference at a church back when we were living near each other. And my other friend, I don't know to what degree I'm allowed to say her name, but my other friend was there, and she and I won the door prizes, and we went there, and I think we directed a few people to talk Origins if they wanted to learn more.
Yeah, that was. I remember, like, at the end there was a Q&A, and people were talking about. I really just because they were more fixated on Origins, because for them Origins is where the supernatural tie in. Even though if you had an understanding of evolution, you can understand that you can have divine origins and evolution can still be true. Like, they're not.
Yeah, it's an auto fixation with, like, oh, if we find out that there's no way that life can originate from non-life naturally, there goes evolution. It's like, nope. Evolution goes nowhere in that case.
Now, they're specifically fixated on a particular divine origin, not any kind of divine origin. So that creates that problem. But I remember as soon as they said Origins, and I was like, I have a potentially brilliant idea. I'm like, hey, if you guys want to, there's this great site that is like, has almost all the common questions one has for evolution and creation, and it's talkorigins.org.
Yeah,
and which is great because it has origins in the name, and it's .org, so it sounds like an unbiased source as well. It's not like this isn't from some hoity-toity university kind of thing, because anti-intellectualism certainly plays into that part as well, because some people might be insecure about, like, well, I'm not smart enough to do this, so I feel insecure about my own intelligence, even though that's not really, like, no one's really making fun of you because you're not smart enough to be a biochemist or a geneticist. It's just they're just doing their work. And and I see that same kind of anti-intellectualism in my own family, and which is weird because my family isn't particularly, like, they're kind of sharp, I guess. Maybe they're not as bookish as me, but It's just, it seems very much they would rather not think about it too much. They'd rather just.
It can certainly be distressing if that's a big part of your life.
Yes.
So,
and that might have been why I never bought into it, because I was raised Baptist, but I kind of like did the song and the dance, and I really, in my mind, tried, like, if you let the Lord into your heart and you'll get all this. I did what I thought was the right thing, and I just wasn't getting out of religion what everybody else said they did or should. And I increasingly was like, this just isn't for me. Like, I'm not going to say that they're all wrong or stupid for believing that, but I'm not getting out of it. So, like, I don't really have any emotional investment to buy into this young Earth creationist perspective.
Okay. So for you, I guess we could say the beginning is like the whole Baptist church thing is just doing nothing for you. So would you say at that point that you just weren't religious? Did you have an active opinion on whether or not any of it was true, or?
I was increasingly non-religious. I don't think I had really an active opinion, certainly not an opinion I was willing to express until my late teens or early 20s. Where,
Okay.
but I was in a lot of ways by my teens I was functionally atheist.
Okay.
I was just like, meh.
And so that's probably what set up the sort of like lack of interest in that whole young Earth creationist thing, because it's one of the things is it seems hard for me to take seriously the notion of someone who is going to be a young Earth creationist in sort of like the Ken Ham school, right? But then not also be someone who believes in like broader Christian ideas, because like, or at least Jewish ideas, because like, why would any of that be true, and then like God be not real, or the God of the Bible, and specifically, at least the Old Testament? Because we can argue about like Jesus or whatever, but like without at least being somewhere in the Abrahamic religions, why would any of this be true? And if it is true, you got to figure out which one of those Abrahamic religions is right. So, which is also one of those reasons why it's curious to me that no one that I'm aware of ever approaches scientific data without a belief in some Abrahamic religion, and then comes to a YEC conclusion. Like there are actual geneticists who are like YEC. Like I think it's John Sanford or something like that. But don't quote me on that. I might be wrong. But started out as a conventional geneticist, then became an evangelical Christian, then became YEC, then made up a program that doesn't work to pretend that genetics proves a young Earth and separate creation for different organisms. And it's just like, that trajectory is a little suspicious. Why is it that you didn't see all the evidence for the young Earth back when you weren't in a religion that demanded it of you?
Well, not only that, but without knowing the full extent of that program, I'm guessing that he's essentially trying to tie how much time, like the minimum amount of time it would take to reach our current level of diversity from a genetics perspective. But that doesn't answer how old the Earth is, because, I mean, there could have been any amount of time between the Earth forming and the first life form occurring.
Yeah, that's also true. Although it seems to have happened pretty fast after the Earth formed.
Well.
So when we trace back genetically, yeah. So, now, did you also have any similar revelations about things to do with, say, like history? Because, while certain aspects of the historical books in the Old Testament line up pretty well with what we know from like archaeology and other sources, there's certain other parts, some of which I just ran into just a few days ago, that are wildly off. So, for instance, the Bible has humanity originating in the Middle East when it quite obviously originated in Africa, and there's really no way to dispute that data. It's incontrovertible. Or it traces certain groups as cousins to each other when they're really, really not. So, for instance, the Bible puts the Egyptians and, say, the Phoenicians as like brother groups because they are both descended from two actual brothers of the same mom and dad. Whereas we know from actual genetic testing that no, they are actually very distantly related. They are, in fact, they're much closer neighbors who are not mentioned in the Bible who would be better candidates for this. And in fact, that say the Phoenicians are much more closely related to the Jews and the Arabs than they are to the Egyptians.
Well,
so did any of that
I'm not
kind of like?
Yeah.
Did you have any of those ideas? Like, oh, the Bible history is true.
Well, like, you know, the major stuff, like the global flood and the Tower of Babel, and, you know, the major historical points for which there could be archaeological evidence. It's like, yeah, I increasingly question those kind of things. I mean, yeah, even just doing the math, like a global flood is kind of not possible in a way. So,
yeah,
like I
was asked, like, do you think it's physically possible? And the answer is, like, is it physically possible for a bunch of water to sit on the planet? Yeah. Is it physically possible for the flood as described to happen? No.
Yeah, because it's based on the existing amount of water on the planet, and there just isn't that much.
Right.
So,
like,
yeah.
if I haul a bunch of water onto Earth, sure, it would flood. Like, okay, but that's trivial, right? Like, who cares?
Yeah.
The question is, did it flood, and could it flood in the way that is described in Genesis? And the answer is no to both. But
yeah.
So was there also? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But then, like, as I started learning other historical accounts, where a lot of civilizations at some point in their, or, you know, earlier civilization at some point in their history have a global flood myth. But then there's also the idea you start being exposed to a lot more history where it's like, this was not the world, it was the known world to the people who were depicting this. So I'm like, well, it turns out that maybe there was just a big flood in that area, and, you know, any area could potentially be flooded for most of that area, and to them it's a global flood because they have no other perspective. I mean, that just, not necessarily that's actually how it played out, because, you know, myths are useful for other reasons, but I mean, just that possibility alone led me to further, you know, question things.
Yeah. So did you also, so you did do like some research into things like history, like did you look into things like was the Exodus a thing that happened, or anything like
I think like it was more, I began questioning things more, and just honestly the whole global flood thing is like, once I started learning more history just in high school,
okay.
I started thinking more critically about that. Like, wait a minute, what about, like, so I didn't do a whole lot of deep research about, you know, that kind of stuff, but I just honestly, my increased skepticism, I couldn't just rationalize away what my original understanding was, but I also at that point was so not invested in it. I was just like, I don't really care, kind of thing.
Well, it's interesting because for me, the impossibility of the flood was one of the things that first hit me in terms of realizing this whole thing is, the whole idea behind young Earth creation just doesn't work. And I remember once talking about it with my brother who was on the show, Phil, with the one with the mustache. He didn't have the mustache at the time because we were kids. Well, I say we were kids, but like we were like 17 and 16 or something like that. And I was just thinking, like, can't put that many animals on a boat, and how would they get back? And there's all these problems, like, where did the water go? Like, it says, oh, the water abated, or, you know, receded.
Like,
yeah.
Where? To where?
To where? Yeah, the whole thing is flooded. What's it going to drain to?
Yeah.
So there were, just things like that, and I was like, okay, so hold up. This story doesn't even make sense on the face of it. Like, just a plain old reading of the story. And then, like, I looked into things like, you know, the Ken Ham, his varying rescue devices about, oh, well, you know, they only had to take this many animals, and this is how they got here and there. And I'm just like, all of this is just as ridiculous. It's just you've added layers so people don't notice.
Well, that's another thing. The whole Ark story, like, how do you, like, what about how many animals could fit? Like, what about the terrestrial plants?
Mm-hmm.
Did they gather seeds from all over the world? I mean, like, was there, like, it was for a year, right? So, I mean, it was a year before the waters fully receded. You know, it only rained for 40 days and 40 nights or something like that. If I remember the story correctly.
Yeah, the initial storm was supposed to have been 40 days and 40 nights, but then the total event was about a year. And so, how did that olive tree survive being flooded for a year? Because I'll tell you what, get an olive tree, put it in a big pot, put that in a pool for a year. Let me know how the olive tree is doing after that year. Because
I guess you could, if you wanted to,
it'll die.
Yeah, I guess you could try to make the argument that after the 40 days, or at some point, you fed the birds olives, and then they flew out and deposited some seed somewhere. But then,
and then it grew in less than a year to a full tree.
Enough to have a branch. Yeah, it's like
see, the whole thing just doesn't. And so that was one of the things that first made me realize, and it sounds like that's similar for you, is you started looking at that and it was like, nope, that whole story just can't literally be true.
Yeah, and I think at first I was like, metaphors aren't bad. Like, it's still like, I increasingly, like, before I became like explicitly atheist, I was more like, I didn't care, but I was like, the stories in the Bible still serve a purpose, or they could serve a purpose as a metaphor, as a way, as kind of like a literary trappings for certain lessons about how to live your life, or how, well, like, or certain, like, that's how I increasingly saw it. But then, I mean, then that is something useful that people can take from it, even if I don't necessarily take from those stories in the same way. And that's why I don't paint myself as not necessarily what a typical atheist is, but what the typical perception of many vocal atheists are. Or like, you're stupid for believing in God, Sky Daddy, and all that. Like, no, religion has a lot of purposes for humanity, and bringing people together and giving them closure or some sense of community or even structure. I didn't get that from religion, but if you do, great.
Actually, interestingly enough, so-called atheist churches are popping up because people miss having a community that meets together every week. And it's like, just because you don't accept the claims of any particular religion as true doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a community of people who, you can get together, you can do charity drives, you can have a potluck dinner every month or something like that. Like the sort of not explicitly religious things that religious groups do. Because, I've done things like, oh, hey, we're going to put together, a donation for the food bank as a congregation. So everyone bring in some canned food or something that won't spoil, and then we'll food drive. There you go. Or like, we'll put together care packets for people who are deployed overseas or something. And it's like, like, if your religion inspires you to do that, great. But if you want to do that anyway, and you're not religious, you could just do it.
Yeah, I think, people do that all the time. I think religion is a nice heuristic for people who with similar priorities, or even like people, they have some reason to kind of congregate. And before for most of human history, like we don't live in the very we live in a very interconnected society where you can just be like, hey, I'm doing this thing. It's crowdsourcing or whatever. But back then, like, really, like something that a common interest or a common belief or something you have in common with someone, it was a way to, as a reason to congregate. And then, like, well, we're here already. Let's do things together.
Yeah. So now I do have another question about the whole creationist thing. So why is it that you did become somewhat active in counter-creationism for a while? I know that that's less of a focus now, but I remember for a few years or so, you were reasonably active, I think, on Reddit, and I think, did you also contribute to Talk Origins? I don't remember.
I did not contribute to Talk Origins, I don't think, other than maybe fixing typos or something. But
okay.
I think for me, I didn't want to just dismiss it. It's not that I don't like the idea of just dismissing people entirely who believe that, because in a lot of ways, by talking with younger creationists, you kind of get an idea as to how they came to that conclusion, and maybe what might convince them away. Because a lot of them were kind of like me as a kid, where we didn't really know any better, and then you might be exposed to the right thing, or you're particularly invested in a single thing. And it also helped me refine my own arguments and understanding regarding countering creationism, because it's easy to just say, well, they're wrong. Okay, but how are they wrong? Why are they wrong? What specific way? What are the specific ways in which they are wrong? Because understanding that helps you better understand your own arguments, but also understand how you might be able to create converts.
Like that, converts. That's kind of funny. I mean, it's somewhat accurate, but then again, it's also kind of not, because like there really isn't a religion to be had here, and you don't really have to convert away from your current religion in most cases.
Right. That's the other thing, is that as an atheist, I didn't think that you had to be like, I knew religious people that were, not most Christians actually are not younger creationists. It's just that
most very small portion of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and most of them are represented in the U.S. I think most of them are Protestant. So it's a very specific thing that happens.
You do get the occasional Catholic or Orthodox young earther, but they're fairly infrequent.
Yeah, I at the risk of oversimplifying, because I was not raised Catholic. It seems like those who are raised Catholic are raised with a more rigorous understanding of Christian history and really history in general, and so they are a bit more. They're a bit more. They Catholics seem a bit more informed about what the Bible does and doesn't say, basically. And that, again, I was never raised Catholic. I don't really. So that seems to be my perception of it, at least.
I would say that it's probably true that reasonably well-educated Catholics are going to have a better handle on Christian history after the Book of Acts ends, because I remember when I was growing up in an evangelical Protestant non-denominational church, Christian history basically was okay, so after the Book of Acts, a bunch of stuff happened. Then Martin Luther got angry at the Catholics, and then this pastor founded this church. And it's like, oh, okay. What about any of the other 1,000+ years in there? Nope, doesn't matter. Whereas most Catholics have probably heard of a few of the various important councils to their religion, so yeah. But on the other hand, I also think that, like most religions, the average person who just grows up has sort of uninterested acceptance and doesn't really dig into it. So there is that. I definitely know of some people who identify as Catholics who don't know any of those things. So, yeah. So what was your motive? Really was to try to reach people, but and try to get them to stop being young Earth creationists, right?
I will concede that I just generally like debating, and so it's hard to say how much, but there probably was a little bit of the ego aspect of it. Like, it was just fun. It's fun to debate, like, not necessarily being right, but it's fun to debate, and
it helps when you're right, though.
It does help when you're right. But if you have the right interlocutor, usually even when you're wrong, it can still go pretty well.
Yeah.
That happens not very often.
Now that reminds me,
with at least with the YEC community.
So I know you sent an email to someone whose email I got for you. Do you feel comfortable with me maybe talking about that? Bringing that
Sure.
up? Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know to what degree you want that to be a private thing or whatever. I mean, I know it's going to be public, but
right. I don't. There's not anything sensitive. I think
we'll just go ahead with it then. So, you recently emailed Sal Cordova.
Yep.
Asking for a debate, and I believe he responded affirmatively.
He said it would be great to have a debate. I asked about
you're gonna have to fill some air. I just got a knock, and that's unusual.
Oh, okay. Well, knocking is usually so. I'll start. I'll look at the chat and see what we got here. Let's see. All right, not in Italy. I'm not seeing any. Are there any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing any. Fast estimate is that life first appeared some 3.35. Yeah, Vesta Freya, that's my understanding of. Oh, yeah, what type of bear is best? Well, there are basically two schools of thought. False black bear. The black bear is among the best, although the polar bear is pretty great. Incidentally, polar bears in the summer are not very white, or are certainly less white. And if you're a seal, you probably don't think polar bears are the best, though. Best at maybe, ruining your day. Brown bears are okay. I mean, they're brown. I mean, is there anything? Most things that are brown are at best okay. I mean,
I'm sorry about that. That was the management for the property here.
All right.
So, yep. They're telling me that there's going to be new rules.
Ooh, new rules. I hope you didn't mind. I filled the air with interchanging with Benthoven no relation about which bear is best.
Yes. Obviously the brown bear.
False black bear.
You know what I like most about brown bears, though? Is that their scientific name just means bear.
Where is that?
There
is that show. There's that show, We Bear Bears, right?
I'm not familiar with that.
Doesn't matter. So going back to the debate we were talking about.
Yes. So, what is the topic that you're going to be debating Sal on?
The idea is abiogenesis. More specifically, is more defending the possibility, because we really don't know scientifically. And creationists tend to think that if you can disprove the possibility of abiogenesis, then by default creation must be it. Which, even if abiogenesis wasn't the answer, creationism isn't necessarily either, because there's also an important distinction between the origin of life on Earth and the origin of life at all, because life could have originated somewhere else by divine or natural origin and then been deposited by natural means onto Earth. Mm-hmm. That's for example. So I would just take the idea that, like, we don't know, and we can't. There's a number of possibilities that we can't dismiss. So creationism isn't necessarily the right answer. Yeah, it's a little different than I think a lot of atheists be like, yeah, it's abiogenesis. Chemicals did the thing, and creationism is dumb. It's like, that's not the right way to go about it.
One of the odd things I found with Sal Cordova is, despite being a young Earth creationist, who would then need to say that, like, that maybe dogs and cats don't share in a common ancestor, right? Because he needs to say that humans and chimpanzees don't. So in order to say that, you have to make some pretty low-level distinctions for what what was created. But his arguments go back to things like, I feel like this chemical process in, say, transnuclear membrane transport of proteins or RNA means that prokaryotes and eukaryotes can't have a common ancestor. It's like, well, even if that's true, that doesn't really help your humans aren't apes position. Like,
because both humans and apes are eukaryotes.
Right. Like, at that point, if you're like, that's the limit for common ancestry, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, now you're related to a fern, so what's the argument? Like, why do you care? Because now you and a fern share a common ancestor.
It's very much, I like Sal. Sal's very affable. He's very respectful. Sal does, I think, still fall into the trap of many creationist arguments where it boils down to argument from incredulity. I haven't read all of his stuff, so that's just what my current exposure to him is. Mm-hmm. But and one of the reasons I would like to debate Sal is mainly because, unlike a lot of younger creationists that manage to, like, that are willing to debate in that kind of setting, is that they are either very disrespectful or, like, they just are just. They're just a pain in the ass to talk to, and they're not, and really, like, they don't really even engage with your points. And Sal seems to think he makes a genuine effort to engage with your points. So an actual dialogue occurs.
Yeah, I spent nearly 2 hours trying to explain to Jungle Jargon why an unrooted phylogeny can't help his case, no matter where he puts anything on it.
Yeah.
Because there's no root, so you can't determine who's ancestral to what. And it just never sunk in. It was like talking, really was like talking to a brick wall. And it was unfortunate because that was a sidetrack from discussion we were supposed to have, which was just about Indo-European linguistics and why I think the Caucasus Mountains' origins for Proto-Indo-European is unlikely.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about that, but that does seem. Yeah, that seems.
Yeah, he launched right into Y chromosome haplogroups. It was just like, oh. But anyway, I think at this point we are going to open up to general questions. Of course, if you super chat a question, that will be asked first. But that doesn't mean we're going to just stop chatting. It just means now when questions come up, we'll open that up. So, yeah, if you have questions, get them in chat. And, yeah, like I said, super chats get to the top of the line. And if there's a whole lot of them, they'll definitely get read. Whereas if we're getting up on where I want to end it, we might not get to every question that isn't said that way. But, so yeah, if you do have questions. All right, so is the plan to have that on Modern Day Debate, or?
So in the email, I responded back to him whether I would prefer Modern Day Debate, but if it's possible, he may prefer something else, or maybe Modern Day Debate's kind of booked up for a while. So I just asked what particular forum he would prefer and what time or date would be best for him. And I haven't checked my email since this morning, so I don't know if he's responding.
Okay, he's usually pretty quick on responding to email, in my experience. Yeah. Well, that's cool. I'd be happy to host an after show if you'd like.
I'd be glad to be part of it.
Oh, good. I, of course, would also extend the offer to come on to Sal. Although Sal would I think he likes to do his own after shows on his channel.
Yeah.
So, well, that's interesting. I hope that comes up pretty soon. Although, you know, sometimes Modern Day Debate can be pretty booked up. I think Leophilius is having a debate later on, and you've been on a call with Leophilius, right?
Say again?
You've met Leophilius, like, in terms of, like, being on a call with him, right?
Right. It was one of the after shows. I don't remember which one. Okay. And so I watched his debate over abiogenesis with Neff, and Neffy.
Look, Nephilim Free is the guy who didn't know what a carbohydrate is when it's in the name.
Yeah. And, I mean, Nephilim Free also makes the argument that the chemistry allows for the natural and spontaneous generation of amino acids, but for some reason not polypeptides and proteins.
Yeah.
But he can't explain why that's the case, as if somehow molecules don't interact in a different way when they're bigger. Like,
yeah, it's very bizarre. Like, I don't understand his. Well, okay, to be honest, I don't understand the points that Neff is making most of the time because they usually don't make any sense. Like, it's literal nonsense. Like, he'll say something, and it's like, that's not even a thought. And it's like, this is the guy who was talking for an hour about, like, Australopithecus tibula.
Oh.
Neither of those are words that are real. And it's like, dude, if you want to be taken seriously, you have to get the basics down. Like, you're not going to be taken seriously as a mathematical genius and then get your, addition wrong. Like,
hey, even Romad got his arithmetic wrong in that paper of his.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he just had straight up mathematical errors. Oh yeah. Man. So that was a fun one. So I think it was actually Walker who's in the chat.
Okay.
Might not be right about that, but someone found out that Rawmat had posted a link to the Google Docs document that was his quote unquote paper on mutation rates and patriarchal drive and whatnot. But it wasn't an anyone can see link. It was an anyone can comment link. So in the space of about 2 hours, the comments were much longer than the actual text, and the entire text had like edits. Some of them were just grammatical, but many of them were just like points of fact, or like, hey, this doesn't follow, or why didn't you properly cite this source if you're going to use it, things like that.
Well, he had one source, and he kind of overstated what the source said. Where they did a Poisson distribution to attempt to linearize the distribution, but it's actually not a linear distribution. Like you gotta make that distinction here.
The thing is, he only listed one source, but he actually drew from more than one source. He just only bothered to put one source properly cited in his sources.
Well, I think the biggest problem with the paper, and I doubt I was the only one to draw the conclusion. I was only the first one to write it down. Is that all of the entire exercise? It doesn't prove his conclusion. All he's done is like, if you have these people that live this long and had this many children at these ages, they would have this mutation rate. Okay, that doesn't tell us when they actually lived. Right. How long they actually lived. Like, it doesn't tell us anything about, like, it doesn't, it's just a non sequitur to say this proves a young Earth.
Yeah.
No.
All right, we have a question from Benthoven, no relation, who, by the way, has a golden top hat now. You guys want to get that golden top hat, just join the channel. And, well, we'll start off with not that, but eventually you'll get it. Anyway, for Josh, what are the most interesting debate topics that you would be willing to debate?
Well, I assume he means interesting to me. But
that's fair.
So, I mean, I know that your particular channel is pretty limited is somewhat limited in scope, but I like discussing certain political topics. I'm kind of an econ nerd, so I like talking about economics, certain particular domestic policies. Like, there's a specific wheelhouses, like price controls versus healthcare financing. The abortion debate, when you have respectful, honest people, is actually an interesting debate philosophically. It just usually doesn't. It boils down. It almost never gets that way. You usually have both parties shouting past each other very quickly. But I would find that interesting. Abiogenesis, I'm not really big into paleontology, so I don't think I would find it too interesting about evolution from the fossil record perspective, but I mean, I like chemistry, so abiogenesis or the possibility thereof would be more in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So I mean, those would be some of the major ones. Oh, nuclear, the merits and morality, I guess, of nuclear power.
Oh, that is something that I definitely have discussed on this channel. Basically, the only current technology that could even make a dent in climate change is going nuclear basically everywhere where hydro or geothermal isn't an option.
Well, and you're not the only one. The IPCC has said that the only realistic way to reach emissions reductions goals is to expand nuclear.
Yeah.
Now, maybe not to the extent to which you say, but they definitely think that we have to expand nuclear.
I just go ahead and I say, look, there's really no question. There's no debate to be had. If you are not pro expansion of nuclear to, the displacement of fossil fuels, broadly speaking, then you are not worried about climate change. You just don't.
As a first concern, at least, certainly. I mean, I would argue that most people we can just do solar and wind. It's like, well, I mean, you can, but it's not going to be enough. If you actually look into the economics, looking at the economics is hard to, because politics is completely distorting the economics of it. But looking just from the engineering perspective, there's only so much rare earth metals and nickel and cobalt for batteries and wind turbines. And it's not that you couldn't make them, but then those things are used for other things as well, especially for car batteries. We're not ready to transition to electric cars yet. And the carbon footprint and the intensive mining for those car batteries actually makes them, at least initially, more of a problem. So if you right now, electric cars, because the grid isn't really green enough, is kind of an expensive toy. Now, at least a brand new one. If you buy a used one,
it's like, so you have an electric car. Okay, you plug it in, but what are you plugging into? And the answer in much of the United States, at least, is you're plugging into a power grid powered by coal. So congrats on having a coal-burning car. I don't know how that helps that much.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's actually funny because the like, people like to say, oh, if you have, electric cars will be more viable when they have better ranges. Well, better ranges require bigger batteries. The bigger the battery, the more of a bigger carbon footprint for the manufacturer. So Teslas are actually the worst when it comes to this because they have such much larger ranges.
So,
and that's before getting into the other forms of transportation. We're not going to have just big ass electric batteries in maritime shipping.
No,
you're gonna either have nuclear or hydrogen is pretty much your only bet there to replace bunker fuel. It's something similar with semis. Like the amount of weight you give up in that kind of freight transfer is actually not worthwhile because there are hard weight limits, total weight limits that you can't be above this weight because you're just going to tear up the roads. So every amount of weight that isn't going to cargo is just money lost, basically. Mm-hmm. So even if it's just 10,000 pounds, like that's 10,000 pounds less freight that you can carry, and it means more trips, which means maybe on net, depending on the source of your electricity, you're polluting more.
Yeah. All right, and we have a question for me, actually. I gotta see. What is Dapper's view on the zombies from I Am Legend? All right, so I'm assuming that because you use the word zombies that you're going with the movie interpretation, because the story is much different and I think much better than the movie. But I think that in the sort of the final scene, right, where we have the zombie guy. And he's broken his way into Dr. Whoever. Do you remember the name of Will Smith's character in I Am Legend? Dr. something.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't remember.
So he seems to get angrier when he looks at the corpse of the other zombie woman who was on the table, who, Will Smith. I'll just call him Will Smith. Dr. Will Smith. Whatever.
Dr. Smith.
Dr. Smith. He's been, testing a cure on her and it didn't work and so she died. And so there was that indication that they were actually not just rage monsters and that they had like some kind of society. And that was a big theme in the book because, okay, I'm going to spoil the book for you now. So if you don't want to have the book spoiled, plug your ears or something. I don't know. Don't stop watching though. Never do that. But so in the book, instead of being zombies, they're described as being vampires. And so the main character isn't a doctor working on the cure. He's actually going out and killing vampires. So he goes out, like a wooden stake or whatever, and he drives it through the hearts of all the vampires he finds sleeping during the daytime. Well, the book ends with the all of the vampires essentially surrounding his house one night, and eventually they get to him. And the end of it comes down to, see, the vampires aren't crazy monsters. Sure, they were feeding on people, but now that they're basically in a world where it's just them and, animals or whatever, they are, living lives, having a society. They're still doing things like, having kids and whatnot, so they're not actually dead. And for them, he was a monster who would sneak into their homes while they're asleep and kill them or kill their children. And so the whole idea was who the monster is depends on your perspective. There's a legitimate conflict here.
That sounds like a way more interesting story than the movie.
Yeah. The movie was just a boring apocalypse movie that didn't have any real themes other than science good and also doggo good. Which, fair enough, but... And, yeah. The book is much, much better, much more interesting. I highly recommend that you read it, even though I did just spoil it if you haven't already read it. Yeah, okay, so we have another question from Venthoven. Says, for Josh, what topics would you be unwilling to debate?
Well, I don't think there's anything I'd be unwilling to debate. There are plenty of things that I might not be comfortable in debating because I don't feel qualified enough, but I'm happy discussing pretty much. I don't think there's anything that I'm uncomfortable discussing at all, but if it's like a debate, like, this is what I know, you're wrong, I'm right, or whatever, like that's how debates are often seen. But if there was just a discussion and I have this position, but I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. I mean, you can have debates like that too. So I guess there really isn't. Depends on what you mean by debate.
Okay. Well, let's say by debate I mean a formal discussion with at least timed openings and some structure for the follow-up to the openings. That would be put on in a public forum.
Well, I probably wouldn't debate much of theology. I'm not very well informed about it, at least, and honestly, it's not something that interests me very terribly. I mean, there's a lot of interesting complexity there. I just don't find it very compelling. I would much rather. I'm not even sure I would watch a debate on that, just because it just doesn't interest me. But I mean,
you don't want to be in a debate over like docetism and its implications for Christology?
No, thank you. I do not. I do not have a PhD in truthology from Christian Tech either.
So let's see. Sunday Worship asks for me. I don't know much about it, but I'm fascinated by historical linguistics. You mentioned a discussion about Proto-Indo-European and got off track. Where was that? Okay, so first, I don't actually recommend watching it if your interest is in historical linguistics, because it was mostly just nonsense about the Y chromosome haplogroups in humanity. But it was on the Jungle Jargons channel, which is, I don't know what the URL is, but I'm sure if you type in JUNGLE space GARG or GON, it should come up. So I can sort of sum that up pretty quickly if you're interested, which apparently you are. So the sort of consensus hypothesis for the homeland, say, of the people who would have spoken Proto-Indo-European is sort of like northwest of the Baltic Sea. And there's a number of reasons. For one thing, that's sort of central to where Indo-European languages were historically spoken. They spread out from there, both east and west, and to some degrees north, although not with as much success north, as well as a bit south into things like the Hittites spoke a probably Indo-European language. There is some hypothesis that maybe it's actually a sister group. The Hittite languages, like Luwian and Hittite and whatnot, were actually a sister group to Indo-European languages. But most scholars conclude that Hittite and Luwian were in fact Indo-European. And then, they spread out into Europe, where we get Indo-European language families like the Celtic, Italic, Hellenic, Slavic, Germanic. All these language families are Indo-European, as well as into the East, where we get like Farsi and Hindi and Urdu and all the Indo-European languages, Pashtun, Sanskrit. So the other hypothesis, though, that was discussed was the Caucasus Mountains origin for Indo-European language families. And the big problem I have with this is that the current languages of the Caucasus Mountains are very much not Indo-European. They have all sorts of things. Like they have heavy use of non-vowel consonant, or not clusters, cores. So lots of non-vowel consonant cores. They're mostly split ergative, where they tend to do ergative absolutive alignment outside of first person singular, or maybe just first person. They have very different grammatical categories. They grammaticize very different information than most Indo-European languages do. Indo-European languages tend to grammaticize tense, aspect, mood, and number and gender. Whereas a lot of other language families will grammaticize things like volition, intentionality, degree of certainty, things like that. So Caucasus Mountains also have different grammatical categories for what they grammaticize and what they don't. So it's things like that. And so to me, I have trouble thinking up a reason why these languages, which are obviously related in the Caucasian languages, would be settled squarely in the original place of Proto-Indo-European, but then there not be any Proto-Indo-European speaking groups really in that area. I mean, now there are, but that's because of, relatively modern migrations. As well as not leaving a trail of any other related Caucasian languages anywhere else, since they would have had to move into the area. So it's not impossible, but I feel like that right there makes it unlikely and less likely than the sort of general consensus that they were just sort of on the northwest coast and interior past the coast of the Baltic Sea. Yeah. So let's see. From Vesta Freya, has Josh talked with Dmitry Kunev? He does a biogenesis research.
I don't know who that is, so I don't think I've talked to them.
You should look into it then, because if I trust Vesta Freya's advice on this. If she says it's a good idea, it's probably a good idea to talk to him. So,
is it Demeter or Dimitri?
Dimiter Aunev. Yes, now you can avoid going to JJ's channel. I mean, look, I've seen some discussions on JJ's channel that were worth watching. I just don't think that was one of them. So, yeah. Yeah, but that was basically me summing up the why I think that particular hypothesis for Indo-European is not very likely. And now you're getting into the sort of language nerd thing that I don't do much of on this channel. But yeah, I'm actually a pretty big language nerd overall. It's not just the occasional bit of Klingon that shows up on the channel.
Hey, according to Neff's ideas, because you're an amateur linguist, I guess, then you believe in ling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because that's one of his weird ideas.
Yeah, anything that ends in IST means you're a believer of that thing.
Which autism is a...
Yeah, autism is the belief in aughts.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is one of his weird... Neffy is very strange with that one. Has he backed down from that? I haven't heard anything about him backing down from that.
I haven't either. He has said... Well, he seems to have backed away from geocentrism, but I think he's gone a little too far. Like, I was never a geocentrist. Like, you could just say that you're no longer one.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about Neffy is whenever he has to change a position, he likes to pretend he never held his previous position. Even when shown video evidence.
I did get a response from Sal. If you want to go over that now.
Oh, sure. As long as you're happy to share it.
Sure. I won't give all the details he gave, but the important ones is that he wants to minimize his more high-profile debates, and he would prefer something a little lower profile. Gutsit Gibbon, Godless Engineer, Shannon Q are his suggestions.
Okay. I'm also happy to host if you'd like.
He would also prefer a series of debates instead of longer debates, I guess. Like, maybe I misunderstand. It says here, short debates are more for theater than getting to the bottom of the issues, especially scientific ones. A series of several debates that total 10 hours would be better. That's something that I hadn't even really considered, but I guess he's kind of true, right, in the fact that it is a little bit of theater.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, we could even cycle such things around to a few different channels. So, hey, for part 1, go see this, spread out the love. We'll discuss that anyway. All right, so, yeah, that could be awesome, as Van Hoven said. And I'm being informed that Meter Kunev is often on Speed of Sound of Gravity's channel. Which,
fun.
Yeah. All right, well, I think I'm not seeing any more questions, and we are coming up on the 1 hour point, which is a pretty good stopping point for me. Josh, do you have any last things that you want to tell our audience?
Ask more questions.
Yeah, guys. Well, no, it's fine. Let's see. For the channel, this Tuesday is the first Tuesday of the month, so we are going to be doing Kent with Bent. The 12th should be a Eric with Erica. Let's see. On this Thursday, or the 7th, we have one of my series compilation videos. So it's it's going to be a premiere on Thursday, but it's going to be like an hour and a half or so because it's one of my series of shorter videos, all stitched together, so you don't have to click through all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And there you go. That's it for channel news. And I will see you guys, hopefully, on Tuesday for Kent with Bent, 48, I think?
I think that's right.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Kent with Bent 48, Kent Harder.
Ah.
Yeah.
Because after you Kent Hard, the next logical step is to Kent Hard.
Right. And then we're gonna Kent Hard with a Vengeance.
Yep, and then it'll be another. What was the one after that? Another.
It was Live Free or Kent Hard.
That's right.
Yeah. Here's a question from Vesta Freya. Is pineapple on pizza a sin?
A sin, like a culinary sin, like a flavor sin. Like there's, I don't think it's a sin. How about this?
You're taking a lot of time to answer this pineapple question.
Hey, it's important to people.
Okay.
You either like it or you hate it, and if you hate it, you're gonna see it. Don't put pineapple on other people's pizza that they don't want.
Oh,
Don't order, and don't order for pizza for other people unless you know what their culinary preferences are. That's what I go with.
Actually, I was coming up with like, what would I like for an actual like pineapple pizza kind of idea? What I came up with was like, okay, so take some crusty bread and toast it up a little bit, little tiny bit of butter on it, just a little bit. Then put like some basil, and then a little slice of mozzarella, and then a little bit of like roasted and maybe lightly charred pineapple, like you took it off the skewer from a grill or something. And that might work, maybe.
What if you just pureed the pineapples and then
I want them cooked. I want them charred up a little bit.
Okay, well, I was just thinking like in some way integrate it into the sauce, where it's now like a sweet and like make the sauce a little spicy too, so it's like a sweet and spicy, sauce. That might because pineapple's tart as well as sweet, so that might.
Michael E says, "Is it wrong to train the neighbor's dog by feeding it junk food, asking for a friend, me being the friend?" I would generally say yes, especially if you're feeding the animal things that it shouldn't be eating, or teaching it to do things that it probably shouldn't be doing. On the other hand, if you're like teaching it some boring trick like, oh hey, roll over, and like the reward is like it's like a little dog treat, then no, not really. Whatever. I can see why your neighbor might object, and if he does, you probably should stop. But
yeah, I think as long as you're not ruining the dog's diet in like whatever the owner is trying to accomplish, you're probably not hurting anything. But if the owner objects, then definitely honor that.
And by the way, the Italians in the audience are definitely anti-pineapple on pizza.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the original pizzas that came from Italy are very different than what you see in America. Anyway.
Yeah, the North American pizza does not bear a lot of resemblance to the Italian pizza. Although I would say I do like both styles of pizza.
I do too. It's kind of like the same thing with like authentic Mexican food and Tex-Mex. Like I like both.
Yeah, it's okay to like the sort of weird spin. Like sometimes I want some like American Chinese food. Like I want some crab rangoons or something. But then sometimes I want to go and get actual like steamed pork dumplings or something, like from an actual Chinese restaurant that's actually being run and serving authentic Chinese food. So it's.
Well, nowadays you get like Asian fusion, where it's like the lines are increasingly blurred, not just between the Americanized version and the authentic, but also between Chinese, Japanese, Thai, and I mean it's all delicious to me. So
you get things like, hey, look, this is a hamburger with kimchi. Okay, sure, I'll try it.
I try it, yeah.
So, all right, well, now that we had a fun little diversion into food,
wait.
What's up?
What if you? What if you put pizza on your baby's food? Huh? That was Beethoven's question. Oh no, that wasn't directed at us. Sorry.
I think that is a bad idea, but
Yeah, babies tend not to be able to chew very well.
Yeah. You can't give them paper clips.
Well, anything small enough
This is a reference to The Office, Josh.
Oh, yeah. Right. Don't worry. I've got plenty of them.
Exactly.
I got millions of them. Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, that's all for now, guys. Hope I see you on Thursday once again. Sorry, Tuesday. Tuesday is before Thursday. So hope to see you on. I don't know what day of the week it is. All right. Bye, everybody. Okay.